So I've seen a few articles floating around lately, and I think that they have some promise as a pretty swank little affirmative, and I have not seen them discussed by the previews and notices that people are sending out about source books. So I'm going to point you in a couple of directions, and you can see what becomes of this. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, the CSIS, is putting out a report, and it's currently available in pre-publication form. The title of the report is A Human Capital Crisis in Cybersecurity. And the argument there is the United States just does not have that many people who are experts in the vulnerabilities of computer systems. We really just don't have enough hackers. There was a time when most of the hacking activity in the world originated from inside the United States. That time is long since past. And there are other areas of the world where there are a lot more active hackers. And one of them, if you do a little secondary research, this might be mentioned in the CSIS report, but it might not be. But if you look for other articles on it, one of the things you'll immediately find is that a lot of those hackers are in Russia. You'll also find that a lot of those hackers are in China, so there's a little trick involved in making this topical as a change in policy toward Russia, and I'm going to get to that. But in the CSIS report, they have some recommendations for addressing it, and you want to have a look at those and adopt some or all of them as your plan. Then you've got an advocate. The CSIS work tends to be very good, and you can follow up some of their footnotes, and then you have your solvency mechanism. Now, finding an actual harm to go with the solvency mechanism, that is going to be a piece of cake, because I am here to tell you there's a lot being written about how cyber warfare is the next generation of warfare. The next war will be a cyber war, and you're going to find just lurid impact cards about all the things that hacker attacks can do, about how they can override the safety interlocks in nuclear power plants and devastate entire cities. You're going to find just very, very alarmist evidence, very recent, from very credentialed authors. You just have to go looking for it. This stuff's going to fall off the tree into your basket. It is the low-hanging fruit. So, you got a solvency mechanism. You have a very, very good, hard-to-attack harm, because you're not going to find that many people saying, oh, it's not that big a deal. Where do you get to the topicality of it? You got to use a little finesse for this, but I think that it'll pass the gut check as something that feels topical, and I think that the explanation goes something like this. There are hackers all around the world, and you'll find in a lot of these articles there's more hacker activity coming out of China than there is out of Russia. But here's an important distinction. Hacker activity is in some sense a security question. You could classify it as a law enforcement question. You could classify it as a corporate security issue. But to call it state to state, to call it warfare, the kind of thing that foreign policy should address directly, China, as far as anyone knows, to date, has not had its government organize and carry out cyber attacks against another government, which would make it a national security question. Russia has. They've done so twice. They did in 2007 in an ongoing dispute against one of the Baltic republics, Estonia. And if you just do a search for Russia cyber attack Estonia 2007, pops right up and you can read all the details. Then, the following year, in a brief period of open armed conflict with one of the former Soviet republics, Georgia, not the state in the Deep South, the former Soviet republic, once again, there were organized cyber attacks that the evidence is all but conclusive were deliberately carried out by the Russian government. Which means you can then make the argument that if you implement the CSIS proposals, or maybe you go out and you find another author who advocates something even easier to defend, something with fewer links to disadvantages, if you implement anybody's proposal for beefing up our preparedness for cyber warfare, you can say that that is in response to the threat that has only been documented as coming from Russia. And I think the analogy you could make, if you need to defend this against a topicality argument that the plan is not exclusively aimed at Russia, that it's not a reform of our Russia policy, I think you could say, well, through most of the Bush administration, when we worked to beef up our missile defense, it was in response to the threat from North Korea. So our argument would be that missile defense was a change in our policy toward North Korea. Instead of just negotiating, we also worked on defenses in case the negotiations broke down. Now, those defenses were defenses also against anybody else in the world who might develop missile technology, say Iran, say Pakistan, anybody like that. But the change was prompted by the documented threat that came from North Korea. And that is enough to make you reasonably topical. And maybe you need to put some phrasing into the plan in response to the cyber attacks on Estonia and Georgia. The United States will, but then make the mandates themselves the kind of preparation for cyber attack that then beefs up U.S. defenses against any attacks coming from anywhere in the world. You might even come across, as you dig through this, you might find that there are people who want to engage in intelligence sharing with Russia and think that that's realistic. I don't, because it really seems to me the fact that they've unleashed this twice and the fact that they have so many people who are involved in this is sort of a strategic edge they have over us. This is a way that they are out in front of us, so I don't think you could win the argument that Russia would cooperate with us on this. Why would they give away the advantage that they have? But maybe you can find an advocate who says that that's realistic and that would be effective. Or maybe you can find someone who says that Russia is the real threat and here are specific steps we have to take to prepare ourselves for Russia. In that case, you wouldn't even have the topicality question. But I think that this affirmative is likely to be its most effective, it's going to be its most difficult to beat if you do broad spectrum protection, if you do preparation for cyber warfare from pretty much any place in the world, and you justify it by Russia having been the only state that's carried out state-to-state attacks. So have a look at that. There are just a couple of sources. There's the CSIS report. There's just doing a search for cyber warfare and looking for books and looking for articles about American vulnerability to it. Do that. Put together a couple of simple explanations, and I think that there is a potent affirmative out there to be had. Good luck.